During the 16 days of activism, we'll be launching the second edition of our Good Practice Guidelines. So we thought this would be a good opportunity just to show where we're at the moment and also invite you all to the launch. Now, I'm sure you all know Domestic Violence New South Wales, and you would have heard our wonderful CEO, Delia, in the sector updates earlier this morning. But just a little bit about my role here. I'm the Sector Development Manager, and really my role is to drive change through sector development and capacity building, working with services across the sector to inform and develop our training strategy, and providing tools, resources, collaboration, opportunities for our members. And really the foundation of my work and the development of the broader DV New South Wales strategy, training strategy, is the Good Practice Guidelines. So the first edition of the DV New South Wales Good Practice Guidelines were developed following extensive research and consultation with the New South Wales DFE sector. The guidelines reinforce practices and procedures that have been developed over decades of expertise by experienced specialist domestic and family violence services, women's services, peak community controlled organisations, and agencies that have experience in working with women, children and communities affected by violence. A huge amount of work went into these, and it was a first for the DV sector in New South Wales. They were developed in consultation with our members, lived expertise, the industry partnership, Homelessness New South Wales and Y Foundations. So what came out of those consultations were our first Good Practice Guidelines, and these were first published in 2017. Some of you may have seen these, you might be using them in your services as we speak. So the Good Practice Guidelines are really a guide for the specialist domestic and family violence sector to provide high quality and consistent services to victim survivors. The key purpose of the guidelines is to provide a framework to support services across the DFE sector in New South Wales and to use as a tool to assist them to provide high quality services and guidelines for service development, planning and quality assurance. They were not developed to cover every operational aspect of service design and delivery. However, they're really there to be a foundation for practice. So the first edition of the guidelines, they're still available on our DV New South Wales website, and we have a supporting online resource manual which we've been continually updating since 2017 just to really ensure we're sharing best practice. So in 2020, DV New South Wales commissioned the University of New South Wales Gendered Violence Research Network to complete an independent review of the Good Practice Guidelines. This review was to really ensure that the guidelines reflected the current best practices and also changes to any regulatory requirements. The review looked at what Good Practice Guidelines were doing well and what could be improved to ensure they were supporting best practice in the sector. They also conducted, the Gender Violence Research Network team. The team's work included a desktop review of equivalent guidelines and relevant sector standards. They also conducted a survey, which was sent out to our DV New South Wales members, other stakeholders, to really understand their experiences using the guidelines and their advice on what could be improved. Then there was also a series of focus groups, again with key stakeholders to gain a more qualitative and in-depth discussion about the guidelines, how they were used and where they could be improved. I'm pleased to say overall the findings were positive, and I've included an excerpt here from the report which says, "The DV New South Wales Good Practice Guidelines are useful and well-respected tool to support organisations' clients in the provision of quality and consistent care for those affected by domestic and family violence." Some other findings from the review included almost 90% of respondents used the guidelines in the course of their work. Nearly all survey participants either agreed or strongly agreed that the guidelines were a useful resource for domestic and family violence sector, and close to 2/3 of the survey participants stated that the guidelines assisted their organisation in identifying potential issues with domestic and family violence with their clients. The survey also showed that the guidelines were really often used as a tool for new employees to kind of induct and show a baseline for good practice. Importantly, the review also provided 12 recommendations for future revisions of the good practice guidelines. These recommendations included things like more information on safety planning, resources for working with children and young people, providing information on ACES accreditation, guidance on working with intersectionality, and developing an easy-read version of the guidelines. So in preparing to revise the next edition of the guidelines, DV New South Wales reviewed these recommendations and kind of used the filter of whether to implement in full, implement in a modified version, or not implement at all. So following our review, we did implement 12 of the recommendations, either in full or in a modified capacity, to really meet the objectives of the new edition of the Good Practice Guidelines. So edition 2 is nearly with us. Like I said, we're going to be launching it during 16 days of activism. And there's quite a few changes that have happened, and we've really built on that first edition. So since the launch of the first edition in 2017, our understanding of domestic and family violence and how it is experienced across the community has only grown and enhanced through lived expertise, member feedback, research, sector collaborations, government inquiries, and service reviews. The launch of our second edition of the Good Practice Guidelines really does reflect this deeper understanding. It highlights intersectional feminist lens that underpins good practice service delivery and shows how services and practitioners can bring this to life in the work that they do with victim survivors, including children and young people. We all know domestic and family violence is a serious and widespread issue across New South Wales, and this is challenging work for services and practitioners who face high demand and provide vital support to victim survivors. So the aim of these good practice guidelines are really to support positive outcomes for victim survivors and provide a strong framework for good practice design and delivery. So just a few things on what's changed in the second edition. We really built on the work that went into the Good Practice Guidelines edition number 1, and we further consulted with our member services, victim survivors, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Steering Committee, ACON, People with Disability Australia, services working with migrant and refugee women, No to Violence, to bring that lens of working with people who perpetrate violence, and Emerging Minds and 54 Reasons, to sort of really bring in that knowledge and understanding from working with children and young people. So each of these organisations really brought their expertise to the guidelines to ensure we've built a practice framework that is as robust as possible. So we're very grateful for all of these contributions. The second edition takes a bit of a more nuanced approach to service design and delivery and really emphasises the importance of having lived expertise at the centre of reviewing and improving service delivery. It's been updated to embed intersectionality approaches to quality domestic and family violence services throughout all of the principles, and also recognising children and young people as clients in their own right. We've also included a number of case studies to show how the principles work in practice, and we've also mapped the good practice principles with the ACES standards, and we'll be working really closely now with Homelessness New South Wales and just how we can really bring that to life in practice during the launch and how we embed these. The layout and the way that the look and feel of the guidelines are this time around look very different. They're much more streamlined, have a more user-friendly approach with a practical checklist both for services and also for practitioners for each of the principles. And I think what's really great about that is it's either you've got those within the guidelines, but we've also developed a printable, downloadable checklist that you can just pop up in the office or use when you're having a supervision with practitioners. Once we've launched, we'll also be working with the Centre of Intellectual Disability to develop an easy read guide for edition 2. So just a quick overview of what the 10 core principles are. And if anyone wants to see, I've got how these map to the ACES principles and standards, which I can share after this. But really the guidelines are built on some core foundational concepts, so understanding of gendered violence, intersectional feminism, human rights, cultural safety, victim survivor-centred practice and empowerment, social justice, and trauma and gender-informed approach. Then we have the sort of 10 key principles, which, like I said, have really built on edition 1. So principle 1 is safety and wellbeing, really ensuring the safety of victim survivors are a priority. But this principle also focuses on the safety and wellbeing of staff. Principle 2, access and equity. So ensuring that services are accessible and practitioners have a thorough understanding of the diversity and intersectionalities that victim survivors experience, and also ensuring that all services are culturally safe. Principle 3, domestic and family violence informed and trauma informed specialist practice. So really ensuring that services are committed to working within that gendered violence and trauma informed way and aligns to a strength-based framework. This principle also looks at how services address the impacts of vicarious trauma on staff. Principle 4, victim survivor-centred practice and empowerment. So ensuring that services partner with victim survivors to ensure they're at the centre of all decision making. And this is also about recognising children and young people as active contributors and clients in their own right. Principle 5 is confidentiality and informed consent. So this obviously relates to privacy, record-keeping procedures, ensuring that victim survivors know their privacy rights as well. Principle 6 is non-judgmental support, so ensuring that services listen to and respond to victims in a respectful and dignified, sensitive, non-judgmental way. Principle 7, collaboration, so ensuring that services are committed to really engaging with other local services to provide the best outcomes for victim survivors through, a coordinated and collaborative approach. And Principle 8 is upholding the advocacy for victim survivor rights. Principle 9 focuses on prevention, so how services can participate in activities that really try to tackle the drivers of gendered violence, and also promote perpetrator accountability. And then the last principle is Principle 10, so really much more around competency, accountability and continuous improvement. And this is about being guided by lived expertise to continuously improve services, ensuring ongoing practitioner training and development, and also ensuring there's some strong organisational governance. So a quick overview of the 10 principles. And like I said, we've mapped these to the ACES accreditation as well. So when we get the guidelines, that overview will be part of edition 2. We're nearly at launch. 16 days of activism is coming around very quick. We will be having an online launch on the 6th of December, which Minister Ward will be there to officially launch the Good Practice Guidelines. And we'll also have some tips on how we're going to embed it and hear from services and how they are using the guidelines within their organisations. We'll have an updated online resource toolkit. So this time, the way that our online resource toolkit will actually align to each of the principles, so you can go in and make sure you're getting information to really build your knowledge around those. And then in 2003, we're really going to work on how we embed the Good Practice Guidelines within practice. So we're looking to do deep dives into each of the principles and support with a lot of different ways of knowledge, so whether it's webinars with experts, videos, we'll also be doing some podcasts, so really making sure we're giving more resources around each of the principles, and we'll do that sort of, like I said, a deep dive, so probably one every 2 weeks. We'll also be collaborating with our Sector Development Member Advisory Committee to work together on ideas and initiatives to ensure embedding the practice guidelines in services and really how we can engage our teams in practising the principles throughout their service delivery. We're going to be working with the core and cluster team to make sure that it's sort of a foundation of the sector development from that perspective as well. And we'll continue to advocate for minimum standards as we believe these good practice guidelines are a really foundational base for service across the DFE sector. And they also really do support the New South Wales Women's Alliance 7 Calls to Actions Gendered Violence. So we would love to have you at our launch. I've popped a QR code up here, which it will take you straight to the Eventbrite where you can register now. Otherwise, we'll also include the launch details in some of Homelessness New South Wales comms channels. I'll put my email up, so if you have any questions or if you'd like to hear more about it or share any ideas, please do send it through. We are very open to collaborating and making sure these are a successful launch, but also embedded really well within the sector.